from hurtling through space to hurtling through the halls of Parliament.
We have ignition and liftoff.
Marc Garneau has led a fascinating life. He was the first Canadian in space, flying on the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1984. The former Liberal MP was named Minister of Transport, then Minister of Foreign Affairs. Now Marc Garneau has released a new book, A Most Extraordinary Ride, Space, Politics, and the Pursuit of a Canadian Dream. And I sat down with him for his first interview since leaving political life. Marc Garneau, nice to see you again.
Nice to be with you, Rosemary.
I got lots of questions, obviously, about your political career, but it would be awful if I didn't at least ask you one space question, and particularly how you became an astronaut, because probably a lot of people don't know you essentially answered an ad in the newspaper. And I wonder how that moment changed your life.
Well, it changed it dramatically. It was an ad, as you point out, in the Ottawa Citizen back in '83, and I decided to take the leap, not thinking I would get chosen, but I took it anyway, and I was chosen 6 months later, and that changed my life completely.
And you decided, I guess, to embrace that public part of your life even more when you got involved in politics. 2008 was when you were finally elected as a member, and you even ran for the leadership against Justin Trudeau. I think many people might not remember that. And you mentioned in the book a part during the debate, this part I do remember, where you asked Mr. Trudeau about his qualifications for the job. How do you think that comment affected your future relationship with Mr. Trudeau?
Well, it's hard to say. You know, when you're running for the leadership within the same party, there's lines you don't want to cross, but at the same time, it is a competition, and you're trying to be the person that they're going to choose. And so I really did test Justin Trudeau when I asked him the question about what he felt were his qualifications for the job. And I was never sure after that whether he held that against me, but on balance, I think he didn't, because he appointed me transport minister when we were finally elected as government.
Yeah, so you were first transport minister, and you talk about how you actually fell in love with that job, but then you also became Minister of Foreign Affairs, of course, which is a very big job. And you mentioned that you didn't have a lot of interactions with the Prime Minister. In fact, you write at one point, specifically around the two Michaels and their detention, you write, "The Prime Minister's aloofness led me to conclude that he did not consider my advice useful enough to want to hear from me directly." Do you think, or do you know that this was generally his approach, and how do you think it affected his governing?
Well, I think he was close to certain ministers, in some cases childhood friends, people that could knock on his door anytime, but I was not one of those people. And I came to that conclusion sometime through my time at Transport Canada, and that's fine. But there are occasions when a minister wants to talk directly to the Prime Minister, and I never felt, despite the fact that he said his door was always open, that was really something that he invited. And I felt that PMO in between, and many people have reflected on this, acted as a bit of a filter. And what worried me the most was that I was never sure that when I conveyed something through PMO that it ever got to the Prime Minister's ears. And in a way, I blame him for that, because he said in 2015 he was going to, dismantle that kind of barrier that existed between caucus and cabinet and the Prime Minister, something that had been quite evident during the Harper years. So he didn't, in the end, do that as far as I was concerned, although I admit he was closer to certain other ministers.
You, when you were Minister of Foreign Affairs, you had to deal with a variety of issues. China, you were working on the Indo-Pacific strategy, but you also, I think, came to realize that Canada is maybe not doing enough, and that Justin Trudeau perhaps had overestimated Canada's impact abroad. You also write that foreign affairs should be proactive, not reactive. So what does that look like practically? What is Canada not doing on the foreign affairs stage that you would like to see this country do?
Well, two very important shortcomings. One is that we don't always know who we are dealing with. And this applies primarily to the Indo-Pacific, where the center of gravity of the world has shifted and will be there most of this century. We do not know the countries there as well as we need to know them. Yes, we know the European countries, we know the United States, but we don't know the Indo-Pacific nearly as well as we should. And I blame the politicians, including people like me who have been in cabinet cabinet before. We need to put a greater priority, and it's something I intended to do if I hadn't been removed from the job after 9 months. The second thing is that we want to be a voice that's heard in the world, and yet we don't have the credibility to match those words. And I'm talking primarily of the fact that we want to do our share of the heavy lifting with respect to collective security, but we're unable to do it because we have neglected our armed forces for too many decades. And I go back to my time in the Navy when it was evident back then in the 1980s. If you're going to say that you have a particular position and you want to play a certain role, you have to be backing it up with not only the men and women of the armed forces, but also the military resources. And Canada hasn't done that for a long time. And so we have lost credibility, and our place in the world is slipping. We're not being taken as seriously as before. It's hard for us to get on the United Nations Security Council. Yeah. Nobody came to see us about Quad or about AUKUS. We are slipping from that point of view. And if that is the way it's going to be, then, we make that decision, we accept it, but we shouldn't be expected to be taken as seriously as we'd like to be.
You mentioned that in 2021 you were reelected, but you were not named to cabinet. You were offered a couple of other jobs that you didn't want to do, but you also talk about how it was a punch in the gut. I think you were, I don't know if you were angry, but you were very upset. I wonder if you've come to understand the decision about why you were left out of cabinet, or if you felt that you should have confronted the Prime Minister about that directly?
Well, if you're asking me if I know why I was removed from cabinet, the answer remains no. I don't know why I was removed from cabinet. Having said that, the Prime Minister is free to choose his cabinet and he can dismiss his cabinet. But I never really got a satisfactory explanation as to why I was removed. I don't believe it was because of my competence. There may have been other factors. I decided not to go to the Prime Minister and say, why are you removing me? Because I don't think that's appropriate. I just had to suck it up. It was a punch in the gut. I was very disappointed. I had a whole bunch of things I wanted to do at Foreign Affairs, but it was not to be. That being said, I was wondering whether my last time in Parliament as a backbencher would be satisfying, and it turned out to be very satisfying. I was named to chair the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs, and I was also the co-chair of the Special Joint Committee on Medical Assistance in Dying. Both very important and, I think, satisfying jobs.
As you know, I'm sure you've heard, the Liberals are facing really tough times. They've lost those two by-elections, one in Montreal, really terrible poll numbers. Justin Trudeau said he's staying on as leader. Do you think that a new leader would help? Do you think that Mr. Trudeau should go?
Let me just say this. I think that there is fatigue with the Liberal government and with, to some extent, with the leader. And that's not unusual. It happens pretty much with all governments after they've been in power for 8 or 9 years. What I will say is that I find the alternatives totally uninspiring. I think that Pierre Poilievre is little more than a slogan machine. If he promises to make things better, he needs to tell us a little bit more about what he's actually going to do, sure, which I don't think he really has done.
And I don't want to push you too much on this, but if the Liberals are to have a fighting chance of staying in government or even keeping Mr. Poilievre in a minority situation, do you think Mr. Trudeau is the one to do that?
Well, I will only say that he seems resolute on doing it, and having known him and watched him and first seen him when he stepped forward and took on Brazeau in the boxing match, yeah, he is somebody who doesn't like to give up. He likes a good fight, and I think that he's made up his mind that he's going to fight that fight. So we'll see what happens.
Mr. Garneau, thank you so much for talking to us, and congrats on the book.
Thank you very much, Rosemary.